Imagine you are standing on the edge of hope and despair. Your life, once full of promise and potential, has suddenly shattered. The dreams you once nurtured now seem impossibly far away. And the path ahead appears cloaked in hopelessness. Have you ever felt as if everything you relied on was stripped away in an instant? What would happen if, in that moment of despair, an unexpected light appeared? Bringing not only redemption and hope but also igniting a renewed sense of purpose, a path you never imagined before. Would you dare to believe that, even in your weakest moment, God's grace could reach you, lift you up, and rewrite your story in the most beautiful way? Today, we unveil the extraordinary story of Mephibosheth. A forgotten prince whose life reminds us that even in our most broken moments, God's grace can find us, restore us, and rewrite our stories. His journey is a testament to the power of loyalty, the beauty of restoration, and the resilient promise that love can triumph over loss. As we delve into this profound story, ask yourself, could this be your story too? How have you faced life's challenges and found the strength to move forward? Stay with me as we uncover the transformative truths hidden within this remarkable narrative. Mephibosheth's life is a story of profound contrast. A journey from royalty to obscurity, and ultimately to restoration. Born into a family of power and privilege as the grandson of King Saul and the son of the valiant Jonathan, Mephibosheth's early years were marked by the symbols of wealth, influence, and a promise of greatness. His future seemed set, a life in leadership, his name destined to carry the weight of his royal lineage. But life is unpredictable, and even the grandest plans can crumble without warning. Mephibosheth's world unraveled on a single tragic day. His father and grandfather both fell in battle, leaving the monarchy in chaos. The death of King Saul and Jonathan sent shockwaves through the nation, destabilizing the royal family and thrusting its surviving members into peril. Political transitions in monarchies often bring uncertainty, and Saul's descendants became vulnerable in a world where securing the throne often meant eliminating any perceived threats. At just 5 years old, Mephibosheth became a casualty of this instability. His servant, attempting to flee with him to safety, dropped him during their escape. The accident left him crippled for life, a physical condition that would mirror his symbolic fall from privilege. The child who was once destined for power now found himself broken and marginalized, both physically and socially. His royal identity, once a source of pride and assurance, became a distant memory. This dramatic shift is not unique to Mephibosheth. History and modern life are filled with stories of individuals who have faced devastating reversals. Consider the story of Prince Michael Romanov of Russia. Born into the illustrious Romanov dynasty, Michael's early life was steeped in grandeur. The Romanovs ruled 1/6 of the world's landmass, a position of immense power and influence. Yet, the Bolshevik Revolution brought this empire to its knees. The royal family was overthrown, and their legacy of wealth and privilege turned into a liability. Michael's life, like Mephibosheth's, became one of exile and obscurity. Both men found themselves grappling with the weight of losing not only their family's position but also their personal sense of purpose. Mephibosheth's exile to Lo-Debar, a desolate and barren place, symbolized the depth of his fall. Lo-Debar, meaning no pasture, or no word, was a place of silence, isolation, and hopelessness. Far removed from the splendor of royal courts, it was a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. Imagine the emotional toll of such a dramatic reversal. Not only losing your family but also your ability to stand tall, both literally and figuratively. How does one reconcile a life once marked by privilege and promise with a reality defined by abandonment and obscurity? This question resonates beyond the walls of ancient palaces. The story of Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, offers a modern parallel. Schultz grew up in a Brooklyn housing project, a world away from the affluence he would later build for himself. He described the feeling of being excluded, of watching others live a life he could only dream of. For Schultz, the barrenness of his childhood became a source of motivation. He turned that emptiness into a driving force, eventually building a global empire. His story shows that even in the barren seasons of life, seeds of restoration can take root. The experience of loss and exile isn't confined to royalty or future billionaires. The collapse of Lehman Brothers during the 2008 financial crisis provides another modern example. Once a titan in the financial industry, Lehman's sudden downfall left its employees and executives grappling with shattered careers and uncertain futures. For many, their Lo-Debar wasn't a physical place but a psychological and emotional state. Dreams, reputations, and financial security lay in ruins, echoing the loss Mephibosheth experienced when his world was turned upside down. Mephibosheth's story serves as a reminder of the fragility of human plans. No matter how secure life may seem, the unexpected can upend everything. It forces us to confront our brokenness and reevaluate our sense of worth. Yet, his story also speaks to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of grace. Even in Lo-Debar, where hope seemed distant, the seeds of restoration were quietly being sown. Mephibosheth's life was about to take an extraordinary turn, proving that God's grace often meets us in the most unexpected places. Just as Howard Schultz rose from hardship to create a global empire, and as individuals from Lehman Brothers rebuilt their futures, Mephibosheth's journey didn't end in obscurity. His story challenges us to trust in divine providence, even when the path forward is unclear. The story of Nick Vujicic, an Australian motivational speaker born without arms and legs, provides a contemporary illustration of grace and restoration. Nick's early life was marked by despair as he struggled with his physical limitations. Yet, he found purpose in his faith, becoming a powerful voice for hope and resilience. Like Mephibosheth, Nick's life demonstrates that brokenness doesn't define us, it's grace that transforms our story. Similarly, consider Bethany Hamilton, a professional surfer who lost her arm in a shark attack at the age of 13. Her identity as a surfer seemed irrevocably changed, yet she defied the odds, returning to competitive surfing and inspiring millions with her story of perseverance and faith. Bethany's journey, like Mephibosheth's, shows that restoration isn't always about reclaiming what was lost. It's about finding a renewed sense of purpose and strength in the face of adversity. Mephibosheth's story speaks to the universal human experience of loss, the fragility of our plans, and the redemptive power of grace. Whether it's through the life of a fallen prince, a young man from a housing project, or individuals overcoming personal and professional setbacks, these stories remind us that God's providence is at work, even in the darkest moments. His grace doesn't erase our brokenness. It redeems it, giving it new meaning. Mephibosheth's journey invites us to reflect on our own lives. Where have we experienced Lo-Debar? How have we responded to seasons of loss or despair? Most importantly, are we open to the grace that meets us in our brokenness, offering restoration and hope? While Mephibosheth lived in obscurity in Lo-Debar, a place defined by barrenness and isolation, grace was quietly working behind the scenes, setting the stage for a restoration he could never have anticipated. King David, now firmly established as ruler, remembered the covenant he had made with Jonathan years earlier. This covenant was not merely a formality. It was an unshakable bond of deep friendship and loyalty. Jonathan had foreseen David's ascent to the throne and secured his promise to protect and honor Jonathan's family, even in his absence. This moment underscores the extraordinary power of grace to intervene when all hope seems lost. David's decision to seek out Saul's descendants was a bold act of compassion that defied the norms of his time. In ancient monarchies, newly crowned kings typically sought to eliminate the families of previous rulers, ensuring there were no challengers to their throne. David, however, was guided not by fear or vengeance but by loyalty and kindness. His question to his court, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" was a revolutionary act of grace, signaling that Mephibosheth's life was about to change forever. When David summoned Mephibosheth to the royal court, the young man must have been overwhelmed with fear. For years, he had lived with the constant understanding that his lineage placed a target on his back. Descendants of a fallen dynasty were often hunted down to eliminate any potential claims to the throne. Facing David, the ruler who now occupied the position his grandfather Saul once held, must have felt like a death sentence. The tension and uncertainty surrounding this moment cannot be overstated. Mephibosheth's journey from Lo-debar to Jerusalem would have been fraught with dread. As a crippled man, physically and emotionally diminished, he likely anticipated humiliation or even execution. Yet, when he stood before David, his expectations were upended. David's first words to him were not of condemnation but of reassurance: "Don't be afraid." These words, spoken by a king, carried the weight of grace, dispelling fear and opening the door to a new beginning. David's actions did not stop at sparing Mephibosheth's life. In an extraordinary gesture, he restored all the land that had belonged to Saul, effectively reinstating Mephibosheth's inheritance and providing him with the means to rebuild his life. But David went even further, extending an invitation for Mephibosheth to dine at the king's table. This was not merely an act of charity. It was a profound declaration of honor and belonging. In ancient culture, dining at the king's table symbolized equality, trust, and acceptance. A public affirmation that Mephibosheth was no longer an outcast but a valued member of the royal circle. This act of grace is reminiscent of Abraham Lincoln's decision during the American Civil War to extend clemency to Confederate soldiers. Lincoln, faced with the immense challenge of rebuilding a fractured nation, chose reconciliation over retribution. His decision to pardon those who had fought against him was an extraordinary gesture of grace, aimed at healing the wounds of division. Similarly, David's kindness toward Mephibosheth was not just an act of personal goodwill but a demonstration of the transformative power of grace in leadership. David's invitation to Mephibosheth to dine at the king's table carries powerful symbolism. While seated at the table, Mephibosheth's crippled feet would have been hidden from view, a poignant reminder that grace covers our brokenness. His place at the table was not about what he could offer but about the unconditional love and loyalty extended to him. It was a restoration not only of his inheritance but also of his dignity and identity. This theme of grace transforming brokenness resonates across history. Consider Franklin D. Roosevelt, who, despite being paralyzed by polio, led the United States through the Great Depression and World War II. Roosevelt's disability, much like Mephibosheth's, did not define his worth or diminish his capacity to lead. Instead, his resilience and vision became his defining qualities, demonstrating that grace can elevate individuals beyond their limitations. David's kindness to Mephibosheth serves as a testament to the enduring power of grace to rewrite even the most tragic stories. It challenges us to consider how acts of grace, no matter how small or large, can transform lives and restore hope. Whether in the political decisions of leaders like Lincoln or the personal kindnesses that define human relationships, grace has the power to intervene in the darkest moments, offering a future filled with possibility. For Mephibosheth, the grace extended by David did more than restore his inheritance. It redefined his place in the world. From an outcast living in fear to an honored guest at the king's table, Mephibosheth's life stands as a powerful example of how grace can turn even the bleakest circumstances into a story of redemption and hope. The invitation to dine at the king's table was not merely an act of charity. It was a bold declaration of identity, worth, and belonging. For Mephibosheth, whose physical disability and social status as a fallen prince had left him on the margins of society, this gesture marked a profound transformation. No longer relegated to the obscurity of Lo-debar, he was now embraced as part of King David's household. Despite his brokenness, David treated Mephibosheth not as a former rival or a relic of a fallen dynasty but as one of his own sons. The imagery of Mephibosheth seated at the king's table is rich with symbolism. His crippled feet, visible reminders of his fall from grace, were hidden from view. This detail speaks volumes about the nature of grace. It does not erase our scars but covers them, affirming our inherent value and reminding us that our worth is not tied to our achievements or failures. Grace sees beyond the brokenness and declares belonging, love, and acceptance. This idea resonates strongly with the life of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Stricken with polio at the age of 39, Roosevelt faced a world that often viewed physical disability as a weakness. Yet, his leadership during the Great Depression and World War II demonstrated that his worth was not tied to his physical limitations. Roosevelt's ability to inspire confidence, rally nations, and lead through some of the most challenging moments in modern history proved that his identity and contribution far outweighed any perceived shortcomings. Like Mephibosheth, Roosevelt's position at the figurative table of global leadership was secured not by his physical condition, but by his character, vision, and actions. For Mephibosheth, dining at the king's table was about far more than physical sustenance. It was a daily reminder of his restored dignity and identity. Each meal reaffirmed that he was no longer an outcast but a cherished member of the royal household. This was not a temporary honor, it was a permanent place of belonging. By extending such grace, David publicly declared that Mephibosheth's past and physical condition did not diminish his value. The significance of this invitation can also be seen in modern examples of inclusion and redemption. Consider the story of Malala Yousafzai, who survived an assassination attempt for advocating for girls' education. Despite the physical and emotional scars she bears, Malala has risen to sit at the global table of leaders championing equality and education for all. Like Mephibosheth, her place at this table is not just a symbol of her survival but a testament to her intrinsic worth and the transformative power of grace. Her advocacy has turned her scars into a source of strength. Much like Mephibosheth's seat at David's table turned his brokenness into a symbol of belonging. The act of inviting Mephibosheth to dine at the king's table was also deeply restorative. In ancient cultures, sharing a meal signified trust, equality, and honor. For a man who had spent years in obscurity, cut off from the privileges of his royal lineage, this invitation was a powerful message. It wasn't just about sharing food, it was about sharing status, acceptance, and community. Mephibosheth's place at the table symbolized his complete reintegration into the royal family and served as a daily testament to the unmerited kindness he had received. This story also serves as a reminder that grace is not about erasing the past but about redefining it. Mephibosheth's scars were still present, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they became part of his story of redemption. A testimony to the power of love and loyalty to transform even the most broken circumstances. For those who feel disqualified by their past or limited by their circumstances, Mephibosheth's story is a beacon of hope. It reminds us that grace has the power to elevate, restore, and affirm our value, no matter where we come from or what we've endured. His seat at the king's table wasn't just a personal victory. It was a declaration that brokenness is never the end of the story. Mephibosheth's story is a vivid picture of identity, self-worth, and the overwhelming power of God's grace. For many people, life does not always turn out the way expected. There are periods when, like Mephibosheth, we fall into our own Lo-Debar, a place that symbolizes isolation, loss, or deep pain. But his story is a reminder that God's love and providence are always ready to intervene, bringing grace appropriate to each person's situation. In the Lo-Debar of life, we often doubt our own worth. But God does not see us through our failures or shortcomings. He sees the value and potential that He has placed in each person. This is similar to David's actions, when he not only sought out Mephibosheth but also restored his honor and offered him a seat at the king's table. This act is a powerful expression of grace. It not only redefines our identity but also reminds us of God's unconditional love. Grace does not always appear in great acts. Sometimes, it shows through very simple things. Imagine a single mother, working day and night to raise her children. One day, when all hope seemed lost, a neighbor knocked on the door with a hot meal and an offer to take care of her child for a few hours so she could rest. This was not a great miracle, but for that mother, it was a reminder of God's grace through the hands of the people around her. Similarly, remember the story of Thomas, a poor high school student who often had to work after school to support his family. One day, Thomas's teacher, Ms. Martinez, recognized his potential and decided to help him apply for a scholarship. Thomas then received the opportunity to go to college, became a successful engineer, and eventually returned to helping students with similar struggles. Ms. Martinez's act of kindness not only changed Thomas's life, but also demonstrated how grace from God can be spread through people. One of the most notable aspects of Mephibosheth's story is how he responded to David's kindness. He did not refuse grace, nor doubt his worthiness. Instead, he accepted it with humility. This is an important lesson. Receiving grace requires humility and trust. In life, how many times do we refuse help or forgiveness because we feel unworthy? But God's grace is not a reward for the perfect, it is a gift for everyone. Like Mephibosheth, we are called to receive God's grace. This requires us to let go of self-doubt and doubt to open our hearts to His love. Just as David restored Mephibosheth's honor, so God restores and heals the wounds in our souls. Grace not only has the power to transform individuals but also spreads to the community. Consider the story of Sarah, a woman who survived cancer. While fighting the disease, she felt God's providence through her family, friends, and even strangers. After her recovery, Sarah devoted much of her life to helping those battling cancer, organizing fundraisers, and building a community of emotional support. The love and care Sarah received became her motivation to bring grace to others. This is reminiscent of the story of Mephibosheth, when he was not only given grace but also became a symbol of David's loyalty and goodness. David's actions not only changed Mephibosheth's life, but also reminded the court that God's grace transcends all laws and traditions. Mephibosheth's story challenges the way we see ourselves and others. Do we often judge people by their circumstances or failures? Or can we look further, see the value God gives to each person? Mephibosheth was looked down upon by society because of his condition and disability, but David saw someone worthy of love and respect. This is a reminder to us that God's love for each person is never limited by external factors. Ultimately, grace is not about erasing the past but about redefining it. For Mephibosheth, broken legs are not a sign of failure but part of a larger story of redemption. His story reminds us that no matter where we are or how deep we have fallen, God's grace always has the power to lift us up and change our lives. What remains is only whether we are willing to open our hearts and trust in His providence or not. Mephibosheth's loyalty to King David was tested in a profound way during the turbulence of Absalom's rebellion. In this time of political chaos and personal strife, Ziba, his servant, betrayed him by falsely accusing him of disloyalty. Ziba claimed that Mephibosheth had remained in Jerusalem to seize the throne for himself, an accusation rooted in selfish ambition and greed. Exploiting David's vulnerable state, Ziba manipulated the king into granting him Mephibosheth's inheritance. This situation mirrors the betrayal experienced by Julius Caesar at the hands of Brutus. Caesar's trust in Brutus as a loyal ally made the betrayal all the more devastating. Mephibosheth, too, faced the sting of being betrayed by someone he trusted deeply, someone who had been a close part of his life. Betrayal from within, whether it occurs in ancient kingdoms or modern relationships, strikes at the heart because it is unexpected and deeply personal. For Mephibosheth, the betrayal was not just about the loss of possessions. It was an attack on his integrity. Imagine the pain of knowing that your reputation has been tarnished and that the king who had once extended extraordinary grace to you might now doubt your loyalty. David, under pressure and overwhelmed by the rebellion, initially believed Ziba's claims and transferred Mephibosheth's lands and possessions to him. In this way, Mephibosheth's experience resonates with the struggles of ordinary people. Consider Jane, a dedicated nurse who was falsely accused of negligence by a colleague seeking a promotion. Jane's reputation was temporarily marred, but instead of reacting with anger, she chose to focus on her work and trust that her character would eventually shine through. Like Mephibosheth, Jane's quiet integrity spoke louder than the accusations against her. When the rebellion ended and David returned to his throne, the truth about Ziba's treachery came to light. Mephibosheth had remained loyal all along, as evidenced by his appearance. His unkempt beard and neglected feet were visible signs of his mourning for David's exile. This poignant display of loyalty stood in stark contrast to Ziba's opportunism. Rather than demanding the return of his inheritance or seeking retribution, Mephibosheth expressed gratitude that David had returned safely. His humble words, "Let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely," reveal a heart rooted in loyalty and faith. For Mephibosheth, the relationship with David, a reflection of God's providence and grace in his life, was worth more than any material possession. Mephibosheth's reaction challenges us to examine our own responses to betrayal. Are we quick to retaliate, or can we choose grace instead? His story reminds us that true loyalty is not dictated by circumstances, but by an unwavering commitment to what is right. It also underscores the importance of trusting in God's providence to restore what has been lost. This principle is reflected in the story of Tom, a small business owner who was betrayed by his business partner, who stole funds and left Tom in financial ruin. Instead of pursuing a costly legal battle, Tom relied on his faith to rebuild his business from scratch. With time, not only did Tom regain his footing, but he also inspired others with his resilience and grace. His ability to forgive and move forward mirrors Mephibosheth's steadfast trust in God's ultimate justice. Mephibosheth's story is a powerful reminder that God's grace is sufficient, even in the face of betrayal. His unwavering trust in David's justice reflects a deeper faith in God's providence. Despite Ziba's treachery and the temporary loss of his inheritance, Mephibosheth chose to prioritize his relationship with David, trusting that God would meet his needs in his perfect timing. For us, this serves as an invitation to surrender our grievances to God, knowing that his love and provision are greater than any earthly loss. Like Mephibosheth, we can trust that God's grace will sustain us, even when betrayal tests our faith. Whether through restored relationships, renewed opportunities, or a deeper sense of peace, God's providence will always provide the grace we need to move forward. Despite Ziba's betrayal and the temporary loss of his inheritance, Mephibosheth's place at the king's table remained secure. This simple yet profound detail teaches us a critical lesson. Restoration is not always about regaining what we have lost but about discovering a renewed sense of purpose, identity, and belonging. In the midst of life's uncertainties, Mephibosheth's story reveals the steady hand of God's providence, orchestrating grace that meets us precisely where we are. For Mephibosheth, dining at the king's table wasn't merely about physical sustenance. It was a daily affirmation of his worth. Although his physical disability remained, it no longer defined him. The symbolism of the king's table, a place where his brokenness was hidden and his dignity restored, is a powerful reminder that God's grace covers our scars, not to erase them but to transform their meaning. His spirit, once overshadowed by loss and betrayal, was renewed in the light of David's unwavering loyalty and God's unfailing provision. A young girl who survived a near-fatal attack while advocating for girls' education in Pakistan. After being shot by extremists, Malala could have chosen a life defined by fear or bitterness. Instead, she found a greater purpose, using her voice to campaign for education and equality on a global scale. Her recovery was not just physical but deeply transformative. Much like Mephibosheth, Malala's journey demonstrates that restoration often leads to a legacy far beyond what we could imagine. Both stories remind us that even in brokenness, God provides the grace and strength to step into a larger purpose. Closer to home, think of ordinary lives transformed by grace. Imagine a factory worker named Sam, who lost his job during a recession. With little savings and mounting bills, he could have spiraled into despair. Instead, he discovered unexpected help from his church community, which offered temporary financial assistance and emotional support. This grace, extended through the hands of others, allowed Sam to enroll in a technical program, eventually finding a better-paying job. Sam's story, like Mephibosheth's, shows how restoration doesn't always look like regaining the past but embracing a brighter, divinely crafted future. Mephibosheth's continued presence at David's table is a testament to the enduring nature of grace. Though he remained physically crippled, the king's table was a place where his disability was no longer a source of shame, but a part of his story redeemed by love. Each meal shared with the royal household reinforced his identity not as an outcast but as a cherished member of the family. This mirrors how God invites each of us to his table, regardless of our imperfections. Just as Mephibosheth's broken feet were hidden beneath the table, our flaws and failures are covered by God's grace. This doesn't mean the scars disappear, but they no longer hold power to define us. Instead, they become reminders of how far grace can reach and how deeply it can heal. Mephibosheth's story invites us to reflect on the nature of restoration in our own lives. Restoration doesn't always mean reclaiming lost possessions or undoing the past. Instead, it often involves a transformation of the heart and a redefinition of purpose. This truth can be seen in the life of Clara, a schoolteacher who lost her home in a fire. Initially consumed by grief, Clara leaned on her faith, trusting God to guide her through. She discovered a new calling in helping others prepare for emergencies, ultimately founding a nonprofit that provided critical resources to her community. Clara's journey, like Mephibosheth's, illustrates how God's providence can turn loss into a source of healing and purpose. Mephibosheth's life, from a fallen prince in Lo-Debar to a beloved figure at the king's table, is a timeless testament to the power of grace, loyalty, and redemption. His story compels us to examine our own lives. Where have we encountered God's unexpected grace? How have we responded to seasons of betrayal or loss? And in what ways might we embrace restoration, even when life feels shattered beyond repair? Through Mephibosheth's journey, we see that no matter how far we've fallen or how broken we feel, God's love is steadfast. His providence ensures that grace meets us precisely when and where we need it most. Mephibosheth's life challenges us to trust in God's plan, and to believe that He can take even the most fractured parts of our stories and weave them into a greater purpose. His story isn't just an ancient tale but a reflection of truths that resonate deeply with our own lives today. That grace restores, redeems, and brings us home to a place of belonging. Mephibosheth's journey is more than a story, it's a beacon of hope for us all. It asks us to reflect: have you ever experienced a moment of unearned grace? Have you offered loyalty when it wasn't easy? Most importantly, are you ready to trust in God's promise and take your seat at the table He has prepared for you? His story calls us to trust in God's love and providence, to believe that no matter how far we've fallen, He is working to restore us in His perfect way. Let Mephibosheth's example inspire you to live a life marked by humility, faith, and gratitude. At Crossing Healing Hope, we believe in sharing stories that change hearts. If Mephibosheth's story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with your loved ones, subscribe to our channel, and join us on this journey of faith and growth. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for the reminder that your grace is always enough, even in our weakest moments. Help us to trust in your love and to walk in faith, knowing that you restore all things in your time. Guide us to reflect your grace in our lives, to be loyal, and to embrace the seat you've prepared for us. In Jesus' name, Amen. Like, subscribe, and share to help us spread the light of God's love and restoration. Together, let's inspire hope and healing in every heart.